To describe George, you'll have to look at Tarzan because they are one and the same. Just like Tarzan, his plane crashed in a jungle and would be raised by a gorilla whom George considered a brother. Again, just like Tarzan, George was a strong fighter and would swing on vines only to smash a tree. He was the defender of the jungle and had no experience of the outside world or other people. And finally, just like Tarzan, he got engaged to an outsider who was just as beautiful as Jane. He was strong, was durable, was handsome just like Tarzan, and was 25 years old in the first film. Ursula was exactly like Jane. She was a wealthy heiress who traveled on an expedition to Africa, of which I think it was the country of Burundi. And just like George, she was also 25 years old in the first segment of the franchise. She was to get married, and her journey to Africa was to be her last as a single girl. But after she met the handsome George, she dumped her spouse and started a life in the jungle. She also made new friends like Mr. Kwame, Kamau, and even other animals like the ape. The only difference she had with Jane was that both her parents are alive, whilst Jane's mother was deceased. And just like Tarzan had Gaston as the villain, George had Lyle Van de Groot, who Ursula dumped in order to marry George. He was a wealthy man who was so desperate to marry Ursula, and maybe she smelled his desperation from a mile away, and we all know that women hate desperate men. He was mostly a gentleman in the show, but just like Gaston, he was greedy and wanted to sell a certain animal to the black market. Now, George had an ape brother who was just referred to as Ape. He was an intelligent and well-educated creature who was the adoptive brother of George, and could also speak. He was also very harmless, as we saw when Ursula first met him, and almost peed her pants out of shock, but George told her that he was chill. He was also the one who taught George how to flirt with Ursula, because George had no game. Beatrice Stanhope was the wealthy mother of Ursula, and was kind of an antagonist who wanted Ursula to leave George and marry the gentle Lyle. She didn't want George to marry her daughter so as to maintain the status and glamour of her family. She was a stubborn woman throughout, and was also selfish, snobbish, narcissistic, and a really unpleasant Karen. She never cared about Ursula's happiness, and instead focused more on her reputation and judgments from other people. Two more antagonists who were Max and Thor were poachers who worked for Lyle and were ordered to abduct Ape. They pretended to be trackers who also thought that they were the best guides in the whole world, and they said that they wanted to find where Ursula was in the jungle, but their main goal was to find the ape, nap it, and sell it to the market. They were both from Miami, and the only thing they loved was money, women, and tracking. And another guide was Bateke, who was among the 4 African guides who were the locals that were hired to guide Ursula on her trip to Africa. He was a bulky man, and a good man who respected the lady and his job too. Arthur Stanhope was the husband of Beatrice and the father to Ursula. He was the president of the Stanhope Bank in San Francisco, and unlike his wife, he understood why his daughter wanted George over Lyle, and was seen to support her decisions. The only thing that mattered to him was Ursula's and George's happiness, and what he never liked was his wife's nagging and interference with his daughter's love life. And finally, the good Mr. Kwame, a kind and friendly man who enjoyed cracking jokes and traveling. He was among the guards who helped Ursula on her journey to Ape Mountain to see the apes, and his last appearance was in George and Ursula's wedding as a guest. He was played by a man named Richard Roundtree, who was an actor that I personally remember seeing in Two Broke Girls. He passed away on 24th of October 2023 at the age of 81.